Trevor Rawbone, who is going to be talking to us about the language musical thought, amongst many other things. Very nice to meet you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you. In this talk and the paper that I submitted to the conference, I'm going to aim to unite three distinct theories of music perception and cognition, which are argued to be mutually supporting or conciliant. And that's the first is the theory of congruence, which is the thesis that low-level multiparametric features correspond and are aggregated in perception. That congruence is necessary to bind low-level features, which I think are categorical pitch and rhythmic regularity at low levels, such as the beat. And these are used, these low-level percepts, to build hierarchies of conceptual structure. The second theory is perceptual modularity, which is the notion that actually Stephen Koch was just talking about, or disagreeing with, the notion that music process occurs in a designated music faculty, which has been supported by the work of Peretz. And the third theory is the language of musical thought hypothesis, which, building on the work of Jerry Fodor, is the theory of a language, his theory of a language of thought, natural language of thought, is the idea of a high-level computational musical language that processes complex concepts. So perceptual multiparametric congruence, that's the first theory. And for the perceptual MC, perceptual multiparametric congruence thesis to be valid, basic pitch and rhythm percepts must be categorical and encourageable to revision by top-down processes, by cognition, which is to say they must be perceptual gestalts. That basic percepts are encourageable, enables reliable objects for higher level combinatorial concept manipulation for the building of hierarchies. It will be highly inefficient for cognition to revise basic concepts through top-down action. So this can be seen in pitch. The notion of a pitch percept category is broadly supported across various lines of evidence. So the partials that make up a periodic pitch are often integer multiples or harmonics of the fundamental frequency, which means when sounded together, they fuse perceptually. Individuals with an absolute pitch bind harmonics into pitch categories, even though the actual category can vary through time with individuals and across individuals. And when the fundamental frequency of a harmonic spectrum is removed, sorry, the right slide, when the fundamental is removed, we still hear the virtual pitch. Both spectral and temporal theories of pitch are required for pitch perception, and this implies a unification in perception. Finally, discrete pitch is used across cultures. So in the work of Savage et al., there's a big data study which shows that discrete pitch categories are used in all cultures. In the realm of rhythm, a number of key models support the primacy given to low-level regularity, which I believe is fundamental for at the beat level in the present theory. So beat perception has been modeled in terms of low-level regularity using linear filter and non-linear filter as oscillator models by Peter Todd and his collaborators. In computational musicology, it has been shown that regularity is at the root of metrical perception. So I don't think the low-level percepts of pitch and rhythm are necessarily controversial. What may be controversial is that gestalts are actually limited to pitch and rhythmic regularity. I believe above this level of hierarchy, it's up for grabs how concepts are made, because the interaction of concepts in real time is unbounded. So I'll just go on to the next slide. So complex concepts. So as I've said, for complex concepts to be coined by the music faculty, I believe there's a necessary binding of rhythm and pitch information in perception. Indeed, perceptual MC at its most fundamental is the abstraction of regular onsets of pitch information, bind in pitch and rhythm, presumably in an input system of the MF, the music faculty. This combines low-level salient rhythmic regularity, the tactus or beat level, with categorical pitch percepts, close in harmonic space. that at higher levels, complex concepts are further generated from those basic and other complex concepts by virtue of the MC content, which is the multi-parametric congruence content. And this is done by subcentral systems, which are quasi-modular systems, where the languages and the concepts are combined during the unfolding of events in real time. So this is a bottom-up process. So it means that higher levels, of course, can be subject to the information intake at increasingly higher levels. So, for example, if there's the third bullet point of the slide, we see that there's a bottom-up causal hierarchy of music listening in classical music. Goes from pitch, and this is a cumulative hierarchy. So you have a pitch signal, which is absorbed, a regular pitch signal is absorbed, and from that, rhythmic grouping is abstracted, and from those two, pitch grouping is abstracted, and then from the next level, and so on and so forth. The thesis of this perceptual MC coheres with a number of important principles about music processing. An innate bottom-up binding is necessary to comprehend non-learned infinite gradations of musical structure and provides computational efficiency for cognition. The processing must be relatively automatic because deliberating about complex surface structure would involve considerable cognitive resources. And that's why the perception has to be quite shallow. Okay, I'll just go to the next slide. So we can see this in this necessary level of rhythmic perception on the beat level in music of most cultures and styles. So in this example, there's there's low-level generation of regularity, but this doesn't place limitations of regularity at higher levels. So in this example, there's regular beat, but there's perception, metrical structure, meter and hypermeter are not actual properties of perception, and they may not be properties of cognition. So if I just play this, you can see that, if you don't mind, you can see that I don't believe, people may disagree, but I don't believe there's a meter or a hypermeter, although there's a beat. And it's because there's an interaction between the soprano part and the orchestral part. This is a reduction, so I've taken some parts out, but there's a non-congruent interaction, which means that both cue separate meters, if you like. Of course, they're very ephemeral. So if the overall perception is that there's an irregular levels at higher levels, but only the beat is constant. So if I just play this from.
Okay, that's great actually, because that was a good time to pull in the sound. So yeah, and you can see from that it's almost like two different pieces of music coming together. It's in a very crude sense. There's no congruence at higher levels, so the beat level is supported by both, but not at higher levels. So if I move on to the realm of harmony. Harmonic perception of consonance and congruence can be modeled psychoacoustically in terms of the closeness of objects in pitch space. So I don't think this is learned. I think it's something which is psychoacoustic, it's innate. It's very useful to consider pitch space as being stratified into a hierarchy of ascending or descending order, rather, from octaves to fifths to thirds to seconds, with the relative salience of those spaces for building tonal complex being at the strongest at the top of the hierarchy and decreasing with depth into the space. So, for instance, octave space supports consonant harmonic complexes more critically than fifth space. Fifth space supports harmonic complexes more critically than third space, and so on. This innate psychoacoustic preference for harmonic consonants partly explains the primacy of prototypical chord concepts such as C major or D minor. It allows chords to be constructed in perceptions in the development of concepts. However, since perception is, I think, listening perception is intrinsically bottom up, it means that this involves a selective and eliminative selection of abstract pitch space strata. So the concrete identity of pitch sets at lower levels constrains the structure at higher levels during the unfolding of events in real time, even though the higher levels are more important for the perception, the salience of harmony. It's, in actual fact, things are built up from the bottom up. So this involves you eliminating with each step. So for example, if you had only chromatic movement in a pitch stream, it wouldn't support higher level harmony, such as we have with serial music, for instance. So yeah, I'll move on, I think, from that. I think that's clear. So modularity. So what's the evidence from neuroscience and neuropsychology? So we'll do neuropsychology first. There's amusia and aphasia cases that have double dissociation with respect to music and language capacities, with many amusia patients being unable to process music despite normal intellect and language. Also, there appears a dedicated circuitry on the right hemisphere shown through acquired amusia patients with right hemisphere trauma or lesions, generally in the vicinity of the right auditory cortex. The evidence from neuroscience seems to be that the modularity thesis rather is supported by tonotopic, which is frequency to place organization that extends from the periphery auditory system into the primary auditory cortex. And the precortical systems process a large spectrum of sounds, undertake an auditory scene analysis, examine the harmonicity of sounds, onset synchronicity, and spatial position of objects. But pitch category emerges in the peripheral auditory system and is extracted, I think, by the music faculty. So more evidence is that there's multiple tonotopic maps in the auditory cortex. So we go to the next slide, we have recent work by Josh McDermott and his collaborators showing 6 tonotopic maps, and component 6 being responding to music stimuli, instrumental music stimuli, which is it's a region of the auditory cortex which responds to music stimuli. And this is an fMRI modality. And if you look at the next slide, which is continued, we can see that component 6 on the far end there is instrumental music. So it seems to be a dedicated or possible dedicated domain of the auditory cortex specializing for music perception. So continued, temporal pitch and melody information moves antilaterally away from the primary auditory cortex. So Roy Patterson and his collaborators show that temporal pitch and melody information involves process that moves away from the primary auditory cortex, supporting the hierarchical construction of concepts that I've suggested. And this is similar findings have been found with Robert Sartori and his collaborators. We have a couple of schemas. So there's various depictions of how the overall schematic model of musical modularity might be. Peretz and Coulthart in 2003 present a schematic model of music modularity that depicts distinct systems of pitch and rhythm processing. So other theorists like Fred Lertle in 2013 also do it, and a separate system for natural language processing. Patel and Lertle actually posits shared metrical systems for language and music. Now, from my perspective, because I'm positing a hierarchical system which is built from the bottom up, I don't believe that a modular system is structured this way. I think that rhythm and, of course, pitch are intrinsically combined at a low level, and the evidence for this is that the distinct layers of conceptual structure that we have in music of various, the conceptual structure may change through different styles and different periods of history, and but distinct hierarchical system of concept combination. So, for example, Peretz and Coulthart's diagram there, we have a separate rhythm and meter section. Well, meter is something which is, it's very inefficient to have to combine all this metrical information and all this rhythmic information, then combine it with the contour information. To me, that doesn't seem feasible. It's highly inefficient. And what would it actually mean? I mean, a metrical system, as we've seen from my earliest hierarchy of concepts, the meter combines all of the concepts within perception and cognition, so it'd be very difficult to separate these things. And of course, the main thing, that a contour gestalt or a rhythmic gestalt doesn't necessarily equal a meter. There's many things in between. I don't believe really in a rhythmic gestalt as such, as presumed in many generative theories, such as Liddell and Jack and Doss, a generative theory of tonal music, where sort of pitch, grouping gestalts of rhythm or pitch automatically or relatively or automatically become metrical structures. I feel they play a less important role. I think it's the complex conceptual structure which is mostly important. So there's combined rhythm and pitch processing. The idea of a musical lexicon as well, I think, is a bit suspicious, because a bank of lexical terms would demand large memory resources and processing power to enable some notion of concept recognition. This seems, from the present perspective, where concepts are built from the bottom up and innately through times, it doesn't seem likely from my perspective. So yes. So if I go to the next slide, I have what I see as perhaps a feasible system, and that is you have systems that comprise both pitch and rhythm in green. So this necessary connection, of course, is shown in green, and it occurs in the music faculty, where I think music concepts are coined, and the broad mapping is bottom up. There's less, there's and rhythmic and pitch are combined, and it's one movement up into central systems. And I have the notion, which is a novel idea, of sub-central systems, which I believe put together lots of higher level concepts. And this is in the music faculty. It's domain specific, probably neurally specific, and it deals just in music concepts. And it's necessary to put things together like textual grouping, harmonic rhythm, harmonic structure, in this hierarchical pattern that I've explained earlier. Only then is this information put up. And when it puts this together, it's very much language-like, in that it's a computational system. But I'll talk about that in the next section now. So perception and cognition combined, because this involves both. So I posit a language of musical thought, which is a type of functionalism. It's a higher level musical language required to manipulate the highly complex concepts while inheriting the semantic and syntactic structure of the primitive concepts. It's a type of psychological functionalism because the abstract terms are manipulated by a computational syntax. And so this means it's compositional and productive. So the complex concepts can be generated from the basic concepts. And as outlined, I just outlined, this is formed by subcentral systems. And subcentral systems are similar to input systems in that they're domain specific and broadly innate. But unlike input systems, in that they're not exclusively bottom up, and they're not informationally unencapsulated, because they can interact with more general systems, such as a rhythm system, for instance. So you get, in this language of musical thought at high level in the subcentral systems, you get complex pitch rhythm concepts chained together in short-term memory, preserving the congruence of the semantic congruence through time, through each function, combining the sort of being faithful to the original congruent structure. This is broadly analogous to truth functions of classical logic and propositional logic, which are truth-preserving, functional complex concepts of the language and musical thought preserve congruence between conceptual terms. So we could be called congruence preserving. And this enables the establishment of higher level beliefs. So if I give you an example, I won't play it because we're running out of time, but you can see that the concepts, mid-level concepts and higher level concepts and low-level concepts are all, the congruence is preserved through each functional unit. And this enables higher level structure to emerge. So these strings are developed through congruence systems, the combining of congruent concepts. But sometimes, for instance, they may be, and I'll give you the next slide, there's a limits of perceptual MC and short-term memory. Sometimes they are non-congruent concepts which cannot be passed in the context of a congruent string. And so when this occurs, a non-congruent term is encountered, the process of generation must be reiterated to form a new string. So I'll give you the next example in the next slide. This is a piece by the band Nirvana, and you see that there's many functional strings which are interlocking, but congruence is not preserved throughout the whole sentence, if you like, because they involve non-congruent paths through pitch space. So there's a third space combined with a fifth space. So there's no coherent, congruent structure of pitch or rhythm. So we get this ambiguous hypermeter in this, and there's certainly ambiguous tonality. It could be the tonal center of this could be centered on any one of those chords. It could be centered on the C sharp chord, which is a power chord, which emits the third. It could be centered on the F sharp chord or the B chord. There's no overarching system. Okay, so I'll just go to the last but one slide on central systems. Now, the purpose and action of central systems is to direct attention to input systems, to consolidate interacting congruent and non-congruent functions, as we just talked about, so to piece them together. And because all the language of thought can do is combine congruent concepts, if you have non-congruence, it has to be reconciled in some way. And in consciousness, the central systems provide continuity to bottom-up perception, allowing beliefs to form about musical structure and synthesizing the interacting languages. It also permits connections between memory systems. I think mostly short, medium-term memory. I don't think learning has a huge role to play in music perception and cognition, apart from initial learning, perhaps, of pitch percepts and that nature. Further consideration. So, is creativity a possible purpose of the central system? I think it may be a very useful notion to think that central systems explain creativity, but I think this requires further work and further analysis. So finally, the present article suggests a strong modularity and submodularity of music, involving the necessary perceptual MC binding of low-level pitch and rhythm percepts, pitch category and regular rhythm at the beat level. The complex hierarchical interaction of percepts requires a dedicated music faculty, I believe, which comprises a modular input system and quasi-modular subcentral systems that chain concepts together in the language and musical thought. Central systems also needed to reconcile concepts at a higher level. This may go against a number of theories. I'm thinking particularly in music theory and computational musicology, generative theories, sort of rationalist generative theories, which construe monolithic tension patterns across musical structure. I suggest that the complex, multi-parametrically congruent hierarchical system of music puts such theories it's necessary to be skeptical of such theories, that they can do the work of showing how music actually is put together. I suppose the same claim could be, the same criticism could be given to statistical theories or information theoretic theories, which presume that high level that music can be learned from a particular input pattern, because again, this doesn't get at the root combinatorial system that's used by perception and cognition. So I think it requires further work, to use a cliche, especially on looking at building machines, which I've been involved with in computing and AI, which design machines. We've really got to look at how innate systems can combine and generate these concepts in a much more realistic fashion. Okay, thank you.